1.5 million children have been orphaned around the world since COVID-19. However, international adoption and domestic adoption are both declining. Christians are needed now more than ever to step up and consider adopting. Already 5% of practicing Christians in the United States have adopted, which is more than twice the number of all adults in America. In addition, a recent survey showed that 38% of practicing Christians had seriously considered adopting, while only 26% of all Americans had. But guys, we have to do more.
Hey guys, this is Autumn Higashi, Students for Life spokesperson, jumping on Explicitly Pro-Life to let you know about a very special event coming up that we need you to join. This Valentine's Day, we are asking the Walgreens CEO to love them both, the mother and the child, and to stop distributing chemical abortion pills. Women and children deserve better than these deadly abortion drugs that are responsible for the deaths of nearly 30 women and millions of preborn babies. So, I'm asking you to please visit studentsforlife.org/abortion cartel to get more information about joining our February 14th protest online or in person, and see about hosting your own local pharmacy protest on March 4th. We cannot let our pharmacies become abortion facilities. Thank you.
Hey Pro-Life Gen, I'm Kristan Hawkins. Welcome to this episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. I am so excited for this episode today because we are talking about adoption in a post-Roe era. Now that we're living in this new America, and we have more than 3,000 pregnancy centers and maternity homes, this social safety net that the pro-life movement has established, we're promoting this, giving this non-violent alternative to abortion. The other side of the coin, though, is adoption and foster care. And you all know this. This comes up in every discussion you have with abortion advocates. So today I wanted to dig in on this episode of Explicitly Pro-Life about what the status of adoption is now in America, where we are, what are challenges that we face, and also dig in a little bit about what we can do, even if we're not ready to adopt ourselves, how we can promote adoption, how we can talk better about adoption. So my guest today is Herbie Newell. He's been involved in the adoption world for nearly 20 years. He's the president of Lifeline. Under Herbie's leadership, Lifeline Children's Services is the largest evangelical Christian adoption agency in America. They have outreach to 25 countries. They're licensed in 12 states, and they even have a foster care initiative and arm there at Lifeline. So Herbie, thanks for coming on today.
Kristan, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Your bio is amazing just to hear all that Lifeline Christian Services does. But for all of the viewers and guests that are tuning in, can you explain, because you guys have a whole host of ministry initiatives that really kind of is like this full service adoption foster agency. Can you explain a little bit more about Lifeline?
Yeah, and so it really is on the continuum of the life cycle of really a pregnant woman. Mm-hmm. And how do we intervene in the life cycle to break cycles, to help children, and ultimately to do justice to the woman and to the child. And so we have 5 pillars of ministry, and all of these ministry pillars are really aimed at breaking cycles, helping children and helping women. And so the first is our pregnancy ministry. Okay. And so we work with women in all 50 states to help them get the truth about life, to understand that they have many options on the life side. It's not just parenting and adoption. There's also ways we can come alongside of them and help them get on their feet postpartum until they can actually bring their child in their home. So it's interim care. It's a lot of different ways to help a woman be able to see, I can do this, I can choose life, and I can do it successfully. And then second, as we talked about, is our adoption ministries. It's domestic and international ministry. So we're helping find children that might not have the ability to stay with their biological families. They need intervention from another family, and bringing those children into those families in a safe, healthy way that honestly too, it protects the biological family, and it brings them into the equation as well as maybe the country of origin. So we would tell any family, if you're adopting, you're not just called to a child, you're called either to minister to a woman or minister to a nation nation in some way. And then third would be our foster care, which we've talked about, and it's foster care and family reunification. And so we realize that when women choose life, unfortunately, many are going to have intervention with the state, with the foster care system. And so we want to make sure that we're helping with family reunification, kids that are aging out, as well as kids that are in foster care, providing those foster families. And then we have our global orphan care ministry. And so as a Christian organization, we believe ultimately it's the call on God's people to care for the most vulnerable. And so we don't want to just equip the domestic church here in the United States, but the global church around the world to help them understand God's call on them to care for women and children. And so it's domestic international adoption. It's foster care on an international stage, as well as orphan care. And then last but certainly not least, we have our counseling and education ministries. And so the heart of Lifeline is ultimately that women and children will be discipled, that they'll come to know the grace and the goodness of Christ Jesus. But there's a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt and pain that goes into that. And so how do we help those that are helping be able to navigate that hurt, that trauma, and that pain so that ultimately they can reach the heart for the gospel?
That's amazing. You're a little busy.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. How many team members do you have in Alabama where your headquarters
Yeah,
is?
so headquarters in Alabama, we have just under 80. And then around the United States, we're over 200.
That's amazing. That's so awesome to hear. And then in the states, can you tell us what states you all are licensed?
Yeah. So we're actually licensed in 17 now.
Oh, wow.
But mostly the Southeastern. So for any college football fans, we're in every SEC state.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds important.
If anybody gets that, it's the Southeastern Conference states. So anywhere in the Southeast, plus South Dakota, Wyoming, and Washington State and Kansas. So
that's awesome.
if someone looks up and says, where's their SEC school, and adds those 4 states, you got it.
That's awesome. That's amazing to hear that you're in Washington State as well. I mean, especially with some of the terrible legislation that's been coming out of Washington State, attacking the Catholic Church, for example, and things like that. So that's awesome, and I'm so glad. I mean, it's one of the things that we've been concerned about in the broader pro-life movement has been this attack on Christian adoption agencies and these lawsuits against Christian adoption agencies to participate in same-sex adoptions. And so there was a big Supreme Court, the other big Supreme Court thing that happened in June that everyone doesn't know about because everyone's focusing on Dobbs was this Catholic Charities versus Philadelphia case, which was massive for Christian adoption efforts. Can you explain to everybody what this massive June ruling was and how it's sort of affecting all adoption work in the country right now?
Yeah, so in Philadelphia, there were several providers that had a statement of faith, like Catholic Charities and a couple others. And the city of Philadelphia actually came in and said, you're either going to have to succumb to placing with anyone, no matter their background, no matter if they can sign your statement of faith, or we're going to take your funding and we're going to take the children out of the homes that they're in. And so Catholic Charities was actually the only one of the agencies that said, hey, we're going to challenge this. Our religious liberties at stake, the future of our organization at stake, and the lives of these kids more than anything is at stake. And so they actually sued the city of Philadelphia and came against them and said, we have the opportunity in this country. You can't encroach upon not only our religious liberty, but the religious liberty of these families. And so they won that case where the Supreme Court basically said, yes, you've got to be able to respect these long-standing beliefs. Now, we have to be careful, right? So you can't be operating and then decide, okay, now I'm going to have a statement of faith, right? But if this is what you were founded on and this is who you've been and you've operated consistently, the Supreme Court said you've got to be able to continue in perpetuity to be able to live by that statement of faith. And for an organization like ours, it's huge protection. We don't take any state, federal government funds, so that's always been a protection for us.
Sure.
But this is just an added level of protection. And certainly, as you talk about Washington State, it's been a huge thing that we've been able to mention in Washington State when we've gotten pressure on some different things, just to remind them, hey, we've got this protection. We've had these long-standing beliefs. They're ones we've had since our founding. We've not changed them. Yeah. We're not adding to them. This is who we are, and this is how we're going to operate.
I mean, what's the harm that the city of Philadelphia or in any of these cases we've seen that these government agencies are saying that by the Christian adoption agencies are inflicting?
Yeah.
What was the legitimate argument for No.
Without getting overly in the weeds of this, I mean, I really do think it's the war on family and children. And it's this whole idea that, first we have Planned Parenthood that says we want to rip children out of the womb of moms. And they go the step further, really, right? Because women are the only ones created by God in his image that can bear children. And yet it's almost like saying that's a curse, right? And that's not a curse, it's a blessing by God. And so Planned Parenthood does that. The next thing we see is the transgender, the LGBTQ movement. And at the heart of it, it's against children, because everything in that movement is taking away procreation. It's taking away children coming to be. And so now we've got this war on children, and I remember when I was coming up, if somebody was having issues, you possibly got counseling, but it was really like, hey, this is a teenage issue. Now we're trying to go, well, maybe you're not who you think you are. Maybe you're a different gender. But at the end of the day, it's this political correctness. It's this war on children and saying we want to do everything we can to change the way that God made us in his image. And it's twisting that around. And so, Philadelphia is like, hey, we're going to go in with this new wave, transgenderism. We want you to appreciate that. And Catholic Social Services was like, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue to operate. We're going to continue to love and take care of these children well. I honestly don't know how Philadelphia was able to afford to do that, because around
taxpayers
the
should be outraged that they
and
went
the
so
country,
far.
We have a lack of foster families. It's not like
yes, last time I checked.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure what the logic was.
The irony is that every time I'm on a college campus, I'm speaking with an abortion advocate yelling at me, and they'll always bring up, well, what about the children languishing in foster care that have no homes? If you pro-lifers would just adopt these children. And I'm like, okay, yeah, these children obviously deserve loving homes. But why is your movement trying to shut down Christian adoption agencies and foster facilities? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, unless there's a scheme to say we want to take you out of every place and every realm so that we can try to disprove you. But even since
and their arguments for abortion, they're bringing up children who are in foster care, the tragedy of that situation, the trauma that the child endures, to justify an extremist belief in abortion. Right. I mean, it's just like why that when they bring up abortion in cases of rape, because if I say, well, fine, let's put that to the side, pretend I agree with you. Do you agree with me that 98.5% of all other abortions are wrong? And they're like, no, I didn't say that. Well, then why did you bring up that very sad specific case to justify everything else?
That's right. Yeah. And we need to, as pro-life people, to continue to flood the foster care system with our support, because they are right. If we have less abortions, we are going to have more kids in foster care. And, I think, though, we've got to come back and say, yes, but that's a life that has an opportunity. That's a life that has a chance. That's a life that can become something absolutely extraordinary. And we have presidents that spent time in foster care. We have leaders around the world that have been adopted and have spent time in foster care. So to say that foster care is some type of stigma that you can't rise above, life is a gift, and life is precious, and there's opportunity in life. And so if we go and we wrap around these kids, we're going to be able to see them reach their opportunity and full potential.
So how do Christians and pro-lifers impact and help serve children and families dealing with a foster care situation? I mean, I think it's really important. I always try to bring this up when we talk about foster care. The goal of foster care is not adoption, it's family reunification. There's, I think, 400,000 children in foster care, but sadly, there's over 100,000 right now of those children who are waiting for a family. The parental rights have been terminated. How can we make a difference on foster care?
Well, first of all, and obviously noting that we have students that are listening.
Yes.
One of the things that we need young people who are willing to get engaged with these biological families. The truth of the matter is a lot of the families that have lost their kids through foster care are in that college age range. They're young adults. They're between the ages of 18 and about 25. And honestly, a lot of what we see with these families is poverty, and it's not just physical poverty, it's relational poverty, right? So the job they just lost, is probably the best job they've ever had. And they don't have a community of folks that are helping unlock other opportunities for them. Everyone in their life is not leading them to make good choices. They're leading them to make negative choices. And so, one of the things we want to do, and as a ministry, we have something called Families Count, where we connect believers, we connect churches to these families who have lost their kids to foster care. We're teaching a 6-week parenting course. We're matching them with mentors who will walk life with them. We're creating relationship and community among these families so they can encourage, keep one another accountable, and ultimately, so we believe by the grace of God, they can be healed and have their kids come back into their home. And that's what's so important, because you're right, foster care was never meant to take kids out for adoption. It was meant to be temporary in order that a family could get back on their feet. Government cannot redeem, government cannot restore or reconcile people, right? They come in and bring kids out to keep laws and safety.
To protect the children.
Yeah. It's now the church's role to come back in and say, let's come back around these families. Let's restore them, renew them, and help them so that ultimately those families can have their kids come back. And it's not just to check a box, but it's a healthy, my kids are going to come back. Through our Families Count, which in fairness, we've only been doing for about 12 years, we've seen 75% of the kids that go back to their families stay with their family and not go back into foster care. So just to put that in perspective, the state's recidivism rate is about 70%. So the number of kids that come back in the home and go back into foster care. And a lot of that
is it drug use?
It's drug use, but it's also taking someone through a 10-step program without relationship. And the only real difference that we have is we have the gospel of Christ Jesus, which is huge. But then 2, it's that relationship, those positive relationships. Because we know, as all of us, we're going to have times of struggle. But it's during our struggle that we need other people that are encouraging us, lifting our arms up, and pointing us in the way to go. And that's what these families need, is a community that's going to hold their arms up and point them in the way to go.
Yeah, that was one of the things that struck me when I got involved first in the pro-life movement, volunteering at Pregnancy Center, was that the women that were coming to the center for the pregnancy test, to have a conversation, for diapers or formula, we were their family. They had that relational poverty of they didn't have that church family or that friend to go to or the parent. And you're right. All of us are experiencing a time of crisis in our life. The difference is, do you have somebody you can turn to? Do you have a support structure in place in your neighborhood community to help you? And that's when we see these deep crises begin. It's also the recidivism rate you just talked about, I think, this is a podcast for another day. But, I think is a very good argument. Talking about, some of my libertarian friends are very much of let's legalize all drugs and it's individual choice. But what do you do when that person has children?
That's right.
And we look at the foster care system and the amount of children in the foster care system because of drug use. And so another day, but I'll just leave that little controversial statement there for some people I know that listen to the podcast frequently who need to hear that reminder. So how can we get involved? So does that mean like volunteering at a pregnancy center? Does that mean big brother, big sister? What's the tangible? Like, is there a website, a student who says, I want to help a family who's experiencing the foster care system right now? Like, where can they specifically go?
Yeah, so we would use anybody who wants to get engaged with Lifeline.
So just contact you.
So you can contact Lifeline.
You're going to give us your personal email and everyone just say,
yeah, okay. That's right. You can go get us online. I would say this, though. There's some ways that folks can go without contacting an outside organization, right? The number of women that actually think about adoption, again, interestingly enough, most of them are between the ages of about 18 and 25. This is the age. That's the age that women are actually choosing adoption. 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds, as sad as it is when they're pregnant, they're not considering adoption. It's either abortion or parenting. Very few will consider adoption. I think there's a developmental part of that comes into it. I think there's obviously a family pressure that comes into that. But the women that we typically see are between the ages of 18 and 25. And so I think for a college-age student, for a young adult, it's coming alongside and helping that woman explore, what does adoption look like? What do your options look like? What is before you? And being a positive outlet to your friend to help them explore all of their options, and being a listening voice and advising ear. I think that's a huge thing that you can do.
You mentioned earlier, and when you're talking about your 5 pillars, we have 5 pillars of Students for Life, so I love it. You mentioned interim care. What is that?
Yeah, so interim care, we call it harbor families. It's a safe harbor in the storm. That's where a mom says, I need help. I don't want the government to get engaged. I don't want my kids to end up in foster care, but I need help to get on my feet. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they don't have adequate housing. Maybe they have a friend that says, hey, you need to get off this substance or you need some help. They can take 60 to 90 days and put their child in interim care. They're making a loving choice. It's a parental
And this
choice.
is legal?
It's totally legal. And they sign the paperwork to give custody to a family for 60 to 90 days so that they can get on their feet and get their children back. And so it's a huge entree to keep kids out of foster care, but it's another great option for women who are saying, I want to parent, but I just need a little help. I need to get over this roadblock. I need to be able to find stability. And again, I don't want to paint this picture that 60 to 90 days, you can't see your child. It's 60 to 90 days where you know they're in a safe place. You could go by and see them. You can have visits. It's not the government that's regulating this. This is you making a decision to say, hey, I need help. I'm going to seek that help, and I'm going to be able to be a mom that I need to be to my child.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that was like a thing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is that something Lifeline does in the 12 states as well?
We do it in the 12 states, and then there's another organization called Safe Families that also does it. So many people may have called it as Safe Families or Interim Care. Harbor Families is what we call it. But it's a segment where for 60 to 90 days, a mom has that option to say, I need help, and I don't want the foster care system to come get my child.
That's amazing. This is why I love the podcast, not only just for everyone listening, but I learn all kinds of new stuff all the time. Yeah. So it's great. It's like you guys are schooling, all my guests school me at the same time. Let's talk about adoption. The adoption rates in America are on the decline. What's the current numbers of children who are waiting for an adoptive family? If they're and if they're not adopted, they enter the foster care system while they wait. And what can we do, especially as younger pro-life advocates, to help promote adoption?
Right. So there are about 125,000 kids in foster care right now who've had their parental rights terminated. They're waiting for a home. The truth of the matter is most of those kids are not babies. They're not infants. They're 8 and up, and most of them even 12 to 14. So they're older kids that unfortunately too have jumped from foster home to foster home. As we've talked about recidivism rates, some of those have been back and forth. And so there's some baggage and there's some trauma associated with these kids, but they desperately need a home. They desperately need a place where they can have permanence, they can have stability. Then any given year in the United States, there's between 25 and 30,000 domestic infant adoptions. Wow. So that's moms making that choice to place their infant or their toddler for adoption. And so there are certainly plenty of families for the 25 to 30. Where we desperately need families is we need families for these kids in foster care. And
it seems like such a reasonable number. There's 100,000 children. How many churches are there across America? Like 40,000?
Oh, yeah.
So like if every church just stepped up and there was like 3 families that said, yes, like that would be done.
That's right.
There wouldn't be a wait list.
That's right. Now, it is
it's
difficult.
Like a reasonable goal. I feel like that's like
right.
doable.
That's right. But we need families that also understand, right? Just like our call, that you're inviting hurt and you're inviting trauma into your life. And it's not...
But that's a hard... that's hard. My
call.
husband and I have looked into it as well. And it's hard because we have 4 children who have been homeschooled. They live in a very safe little bubble. And also we live in an RV and travel the country. So no state agency, I think, would be like... Yes, that's totally normal. But we'd be like, man, when we get into our sticks and bricks, like our normal house, but then it's like, as a parent, you also can think about your children because the trauma, the statistics are every single child who's living in foster care has experienced trauma. Right. So you will invite trauma into your home. And so it's how do we wait till our children are older and they're teens and we can sit them down and say, okay, we're bringing so-and-so into the home and we need to have these conversations. I think that's hard. I think that's hard for us as pro-life advocates who feel this conviction to want to step up, but then also have to protect our children from trauma as well.
And I think that's where, the pro-life movement and all of this it really is a place for everyone, no matter your age or your stage of life, to get engaged. And what we really need is a lot of empty nesters.
That's what I was just thinking. Empty nesters, because they've just experienced the whole trauma of having a teenager and getting them out. I mean, I have a almost 14-year-old, so they've done it. That's right. And then they've got some like experience dealing with all of the teenage stuff, and
you're well versed in the teenage stuff.
Yep.
You've got the time to be able to focus,
Yeah.
the energy to be able to focus, and you also know, unfortunately, hurting people sometimes will hurt others, and so you've got a freedom to know, I can help this child, I can pour into them, and I can really give them what they need. And so, but for our college age students, there's ways that they can come in and mentor foster kids that have been adopted, to be a help. We need the army of pro-life people and the army of Christians to say, hey, we don't just need to recruit a family to adopt one of these 125,000. We need an army to come around this family as we really pour into the life of this child and help them see wholeness.
Is that one thing I always thought was what if our churches had a respite care set up? I mean, especially for, even families like ours who have complex medical illnesses. I know other churches, even here in the Metro DC area, have this amazing respite care where your kid gets to go hang out, basically like a little mini Disney World for a weekend. The parents get a break from the medical care. And so I think that's one of the things that, especially for families who bring in and welcome a new child in their home who has trauma, who has complex illnesses or issues, sometimes the parents need a break.
That's right.
They need a day.
That's right.
To just chill. That's something we all can do and say, yeah, I'll hang out with a kid for 12 hours.
Yeah, we would wrap around these families, and a lot of these churches do have these wraparound support where they're wrestling in prayer, they're providing respite, they're bringing meals, they're praying for these families, and they're active. Even talking about Metro DC. Good friend of mine, David Platt, at his church, McLean Bible.
That's what I was talking about, McLean. Yeah.
They have Jill's house, where, a family that has a child with a disability can bring that child and have a weekend. They have a huge foster and respite ministry at McLean. And they're not just McLean here in DC. There's so many churches around the country that do say, hey, we don't want to just provide families, but we want to actually help these families and these children thrive and survive and to see them reach their full potential.
Is there a website or action? So where can I'm convicted, I want to get involved, I want to help families who are adopting. Where can I go?
Yeah, so again, you can always come to Lifeline, lifelinechild.org.
I'm going to give you work,
We can connect you to someone else. However, I would also say if you are a church and you're like, hey, I want to know more about this wraparound, you can find it at Lifeline. Focus on the Family has great information through their life space to talk about how you can wrap around and start a foster care ministry. Good friends of ours, Promise 686 out of Atlanta, they work across the country. They do great work on helping churches learn how to be adoption and foster friendly, and my friend Andy Cook and his team will come in and help those folks. America's Kids Belong is another great partner organization that comes and actually helps a church connect with these waiting kids. So how do we find out the waiting kids? How do we get connected? And so there's a lot of great opportunities and resources. You can always come to Lifeline Child. And like I said, we're not just going to put you in our ecosystem, but we'll also point you to the place where you are. Because it takes an army, and we need to make sure that army is where they belong, doing what they've been called to do in this space, so that ultimately, as the pro-life generation, people will look at us and say, hey, these weren't people that just advocated against abortion. These are people who showed the value and the sanctity of life in everyday living, in kids that were outside the womb, in the way they did gospel-driven justice, and in the way they cared for the marginalized and the poor and the needy.
That's awesome. Thank you, Herbie, for your amazing ministry at Lifeline. It's been so much fun to get to know what you all are doing and the amazing, incredible success and victories you all had. And I hope you all check out lifelinechildrens.org.
Lifelinechild.org.
Lifelinechild.org. Get connected now so you can get involved in your communities and even in your campuses, supporting foster families, adoptive families, and hopefully get some information for your future as well, because this is exactly where we need to be in the pro-life generation in this post-Roe era. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Herbie, for coming on.
Thanks, Kristan. I appreciate it.
All right. Make sure you like and share this episode.